You're listening to the Veteran Etc. podcast, as there's always more to be said about a veteran. Join your host, Mike Kim, a veteran, ex-monk, seasoned war trauma therapist, and writer, as he shares his years of research in veteran readjustment culture and the meaning of warrior life. Now, here's your host, Mike Kim.
Veteran Etc. This is a show based on culture, dealing with veteran readjustment and military issues that are really not confronted by mass media. And today, your host, me, Mike Kim, I'm going to be having a chat with a legend in my life and in the life of many others, especially those at Norwich University, the Military College of Vermont. We've got a great guest here. His name is Harding Bush, and I'd like to welcome him to Veteran Etc.
Thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
I'd like to ask you, Harding, what, as far as your favorite books, I want to get this out of the way because I was always intrigued by that, because you seem to be a warrior, but something more than that. Just let's get this out of the way quick. What are your favorite books?
My favorite books ever, some of the things that, I kind of think made me who I am and made me make some of the decisions I did. I mean, Caesar's Gallic Wars turned me on to the military. When I read it, I think in 10th grade, I said, okay, then I got more interested in ancient history, and obviously being, a 15-year-old during the, I say not a 15-year-old, like a 10-year-old during the American bicentennial, got that interest in history. So I read a lot of history, both historical fiction, then going into college, I remember German wrote a book about his time in World War I called Attacks.
And what did you, out of that book, was that like a memoir?
It was a memoir.
Okay.
It was a memoir of his, it was basically like a combination of, he litterized, if that's a word, after action reports that he did on a daily basis. And he wasn't in the trenches. He was in a straight infantry platoon in what is now Slovenia, and just the sort of, decisions he had to make on leadership and the tactical things. And, it was a really good book. Got me interested in, the military and the leadership side of it. And then, of course, other books, Jean Lartigue, he's the French guy, wrote a lot about French colonial times, not colonial times, in post-World War II colonial. So Indochina, Algeria, a lot of those kind of books, kind of like, a Forsyth type, like Dogs of War and Day of the Jackal type of stuff, but a little bit more.
How do you spell his last name?
Yeah, Larteguy.
Great. And this is important for me and for the viewers, because folks know that followers of this show, as well as my old show, Veteran Wellness and Life Worlds, we're always getting into different books. And I've specifically chosen guests because of kind of like their backgrounds in not only their lives, but what I call their reading lives. And so what you share is very important, and I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah.
And for folks,
Professor Mokhtari, remember Professor Mokhtari?
Yeah.
He actually introduced me to him. He said, I was interested in, that part of the history and the time. He goes, you got to check out, Lartigue or whatever. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. Mokhtari is a legend, and he taught at Norwich. He was one of the few, I guess, Iranian pilots, jet pilots, before the revolution, and ended up at Norwich. Great professor. Hopefully, we can have him on someday. But I'm sure if he's watching, he'll appreciate you for saying that.
I think about him often.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. So for the audience, I was just wondering, Harding, can you tell me a little bit about your life? We usually like to, on here, look at, because of culture and everything, veteran culture and some of my concepts, I always like to look at the veteran before the war or the military, the veteran during the military, and the veteran after the military. I think that in a lot of cultural commentaries and movies and books, we only get one shot, either, before the war or during the war or after the war. And I like to integrate things and create a weave. And that's what comes out of a lot of the folks that are on my episode. So I just want, the audience to kind of get a little bit of that.
Yeah. So, before I went into the military, grew up about 40 miles west of Boston, near Fort Devens, a little town called Air. And, 10th Special Forces Group was stationed there at the time. So Armed Forces A, you see the parachute jumps, see all the display and everything. So I always interested me. Ended up at Norwich because, my dad was a veteran, but, nobody in my family was a career military person, but many of them did 2 years here, 4 years there. Actually, I do have my uncle that went to Norwich was a career guy, but I hadn't met him at the time. But I ended up at Norwich, very serious about the military. Actually, I a little bit too serious about the military, I think, not as much as I should have been about academics. It was like the Corps, sports, ski team, mountain cold weather, academics.
Right. And not only that, I'll add this in, and if you can say a little thing about rescue team, because I'm so impressed with Norwich University rescue team members, because they were kind of like a very, very well-trained group of folks. And you could see it now, like the graduates, guys like you, guys like Stitt, right? He's like a general, guys like, just all these incredible people that have done incredible things from rescue team. And so before we go into the further aspects of your life, can you educate folks about Norwich Rescue Team?
Yeah, sure. So the Norwich Rescue Team is part of the Norwich Mountain Cold Weather Company. And that was formed right after World War II. A former 10th Mountain Division trooper came to instruct at Norwich. And there's no better place in the world to practice mountain warfare than in that little notch in the mountains of Vermont. We had our own ski hill. So this was like organized as a mountain infantry company. And then the rescue team was technically a mountain rescue team to do, civilian mountain rescues in Vermont at the time. It's since been disbanded, but, the leadership of the company was the rescue team. And we practiced, small unit tactics in the, cold weather Arctic environment. And anytime you learn to do things in the cold, it just makes it that much harder. And so, and that I believe builds a lot of character in both, we had the best ROTC instructors. We were working on, the tactics that made things hard. We had what we thought at the time was kind of a real world mission. And yeah, we may not have been doing some of the, conventional things with an ROTC curriculum, but the challenges that we were faced with were a lot more difficult and made us more adaptable to any sort of stressful situation.
Do you think, let me ask you this now, do you think your rescue team experience, because I'll add on to that, your rescue team experience, do you think that prepared you for the future elite training that you've gone through?
100%. If I had not been, because I knew what it was like to suck. I knew what it was like to be cold. I knew what it was like to be hungry. I knew what it was like to be tired and have to function. I knew how important teamwork was. And the tribe that goes along with that. I remember I would not have made it through BUDS, Navy SEAL training, nor Ranger School. I don't believe if I hadn't been in mountain cold weather, or it would have been a lot more difficult for sure.
And will you also say that the technical proficiency from rescue team, did that also help you in these elite, highly elite tier 1 kind of settings?
Well, it was as far as the technical things in mountain cold weather, and well, obviously a lot of, we do mountain warfare in the SEALs. Yeah. So, that was, that was made of learning a new skill easier. But, as far as it wasn't necessarily the technical skills that helped it, aid climbing up, the side of a cliff with, direct aid, which, putting in the pitons, putting in the chocks, putting in the, different camming devices, and actually climbing or doing it, free climbing where you're attached to a rope. That's brings out a lot of, character traits and
Mhm.
makes it grow rather than, yeah, I'm a good rock climber, so I'm going to be a good Navy SEAL. It was the situation that those technical endeavors put us in that followed us throughout our careers in the military and in special operations, for sure. The leadership, when you're in charge of,
Yep.
when you're a 19-year-old,
Yes.
you've got 12, 17 and 18-year-olds, and
Yes.
you're, putting in a rappel lane or putting in a climbing lane or building a suspension bridge or something like that. You have a lot of responsibility. If you do something wrong, somebody can get hurt,
Yes.
so that makes somebody grow a lot, I think.
And my experience with the rescue team was I was in mountain cold weather my freshman year as a
Remember,
rookie, and 110 pounds dripping wet because of my weight class in wrestling. I always kept it low. And the thing about it is that I was so inspired by guys like you. And I'm going to mention this because the consistency of the different folks that add on to your testimony that you just mentioned regarding rescue team and the whole thing of leadership. But it was you, Scott Bemis, Bach, Di Tommaso, a couple other guys, even Getchell. These guys that I, as a freshman, was exposed to. They didn't have kind of like the Marine boot camp kind of like, we're going to stress you out and then you learn something. They didn't have that. I believe the professionalism, what I learned from you guys was, this is how you do things, and, be calm, be aware. And just everything that you said about the leadership was really helpful to me because
right. You don't have to scream and yell when it's -10 outside and you got an 80-pound pack and you're on skis. There's no need to scream and yell. That's enough stress.
Right. And so I truly appreciated that. And so for all you Norwich University listeners out there, here we have Harding Bush in the real, in the live. And so, so after Norwich, what's going on here? What's going on after?
So I took it, I was originally classed in 1987, had a little academic hiatus, not by choice, came back and completed degree requirements in December of 88. And then, walked with the class of 89. So, but I decided I didn't want to go into the military. My parents had a newspaper that I worked for, and, small weekly newspaper, did that for a while. Desert Storm came up. I said, I got to go in, and that's when I joined the Navy. I first went to talk to the Army, and the Army was like, well, you were in the reserves when you were at Norwich, so you're going to have to get back in the reserve unit and then apply for active duty. I said, I want to cross and talk to the Navy, and got, right in, went to boot camp, went to A school right after that, and then BUDS. So I went in the Navy in December of, I think it was 90. And then in May of 91, I was at BUDS. So 6 months later, I was at BUDS, which is the Navy SEAL school in Coronado, and went straight through that in 6 months, got out January of 92, then went to SEAL Team 8.
And what people don't understand, and I'd like you to share this because a lot of people don't understand this because they may have seen the Discovery Class 234, which is a great TV show, and what class were you in?
I was in BUDS class 179.
Great. And so this is the reality. A lot of people think that you become a SEAL right after the 6 months of BUDS, but no, right? You have another 6 months if some type of selection even after BUDS.
Well, no, yes and no. So you leave BUDS, you go to your team. You leave BUDS in Coronado, and then you go to your team, which mine was in Little Creek, Virginia, SEAL Team 8, and you have a 6-month probationary period where you go to what's called SEAL tactical training.
Okay.
And they train you up. You do advanced skills. You do a lot more demo. You do a lot more advanced diving, shooting, land warfare, communications, medical stuff. And then after that, you have to take your warfare specialty, which is special warfare board. And then when you pass the board, you're given your trident, which is your, the Navy SEAL insignia. And then you're officially a Navy SEAL 5326. That's how it was until about 2000. So for about the last 20 years or so, they go to their 6 months at Coronado and BUDS, taught by the warfare center out there. And then they leave that and they do their SEAL tactical training. They call it SEAL qualification training for another 6 months at Coronado. And that's where they do, like I said, the advanced skills. In addition to, they go to SERE school, they go to free fall school, they go static line school, and then they leave there with their trident, show up to their team with their trident ready to go. So they spend, takes the same amount of time. They just do it all there and show up ready to go. And
you're still being evaluated though, right?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Of course. But, but before, I think it's a better product. I don't necessarily say it's going to be a better product or a worse product at all, but it's just a good product. We were like, oh my God, because a lot of the stuff, you'd go to SEAL tactical training on the East Coast and the West Coast, like the three teams at the time would do it together. And so there was a lot of different teams had different objectives, different cultures, and you develop that culture. And then when you went from SEAL Team 8 to SEAL Team 4 to SEAL Team 2, there was a whole new learning process. Now we were getting these young SEALs with a consistent baseline of knowledge and skill. And then as they grew into leaders, that grew across the team. So it was, you could go from SEAL, they still, of course, have all their own personalities. And they still, I'm not sure if they still have their, I've been out for 12 years now, if they have their still geographic responsibilities. That kind of went away with the war on terror.
Got it. And so here you are, you're done with all your training. And what happens afterwards? Because I think a lot of people, they'll listen to Joe Rogan and find some of the guests like David Goggins, who I admire, who ironically enough has somewhat volunteered to be part of one of my research projects at Columbia. And but I never got to hear of, when you make a career, kind of how that kind of looks like, because a lot of people just kind of see some of the movies, but they don't understand that there are SEAL people who have careers as Navy SEAls.
Oh, absolutely. Once you're in the SEALs, you're never going to leave. Mm-hmm. You are not. You're either going to get out at 6 years, or you're going to get out at 20 years, or at 30 years. Okay. Nobody goes by choice from the SEALs to the regular Navy.
Okay.
So as a new guy, either officer or enlisted, you show up, and the officers are taught to lead by chief petty officers and some of the other senior officers. But as an enlisted guy, you get in your platoon, or they call it troops now, which is about 14 guys. And you start to get good. You develop a niche in one area. It's intel. Well, if you're not a medic, you're not going to be a medic. But intel, ordnance, which is weapons, engineering, which is boats and motors, diving. You have to work in like a specialty as a rep for the platoon and that. And then are you going to be a machine gunner? Are you going to be a sniper? You start going to some more advanced schools. You may go to jump master school. But usually for your first platoon, which is usually it's about an 18-month or a 12-month, 18-month workup, where you go to schools and you go to different training evolutions. You go out to Fallon to do interoperability with the air wing. You go down to Puerto Rico to dive, or you go to Florida to dive. You go somewhere to jump. And then after that, so then you have a 6-month deployment. But that last like 3 months or so, you're doing actually interoperability exercises with the fleet that you're going to deploy with, because the Navy deploys. Regardless if there's a war or not, we deploy for presence, not just purpose. And right. You're overseas for 6 months. And and SEAL Team 8, we would deploy we started deploying on aircraft carriers. And we would also deploy with the MARG. And that was, early until about 2000, where, so you'd have 2 platoons out at a time. There'd usually be like, say, 8 to 10 platoons at a team, and they'd be in different cycles. But then after the, GWAT, we started deploying all platoons at once. So An entire SEAL team would go over and come back. They'd be different, they'd be in different AOs. But, and then as you get into your second and third platoons, you start to get those leadership schools. Like I said, jump master, dive master. You start getting put in more, you were the junior engineering guy. Now you're the senior engineering guy. And then sooner or later, you're going to be the LPO, the leading petty officer.
Let's do this. So, okay, here you are, you're a elite type of dude. And then why, just kind of like in Apocalypse Now, I'm Martin Sheehan asking you, why would he, or I'm reading the file, why would he go to Ranger school? Like,
Well, I'll tell you why I went to Ranger school. I went to Ranger school exactly why I went to Ranger school. I always wanted to go to Ranger school. It's a thing I wanted to do since I was a kid. It's a thing I wanted to do at Norwich. It's part of the reason I took that academic hiatus, because I was too busy running the ski hill instead of like studying math. But, and SEALs go to Ranger school, and primarily, for that, interoperability with the Army. It's kind of like a credibility with the Army thing. And they said, you can't go, Harding, you're too junior. I said, no, I want to go. I can go. I wasn't an E5 yet. I was still like an E4 or E3.
You went to Ranger school as an E4 in the Navy?
I went as an E3 in the Navy. Yeah. So, and it was, they weren't going to let me go. And then we had General Wayne Downing, this is like around 94. He was on one of those big exercises with us, and he jumped with us. And I was actually supposed to go to free fall school. Somebody got hurt. When the instructors got hurt, the ratio was off, so I wasn't going to go. And this general, 4-star, said, hey, you got the SOCOM commander here. Is there anything I can do for any of you? I raised my hand. I said, I'd like to go to Ranger school, but my command says I'm too junior. And he said, boy, you're going to have orders for Ranger school when you get back. And his aide at that time was, Commander Harwood, who I later ran into as Admiral Harwood in Afghanistan. But I got back and my commanding officer was like, I guess you like jumping the chain of command, Harding, from E3 to like 010.
Yeah.
So that's what, and then I went to Ranger school in 94 and I finished that, and I went over on my first deployment overseas, which is in 94 on the George Washington.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you this, because some of the audience, they may get confused because some of the media, they may not present certain things accurately. So when you're on a carrier as a SEAL, are you also like vulnerable to get called up to do like Captain Phillips type missions and pirate, anti-pirate operations and all that kind of stuff that, oil platforms? And
that was right. That's what you're there for. That's what we were there for, those sort of things, to support any special operations needs that the carrier group, the air wing would have. Now, we weren't on the boat the entire time.
Right.
We spent a lot of time on the boat in the Adriatic, waiting to do combat search and rescue was a big thing at the time. The O'Grady type of stuff.
Yes.
You got shot down, the SEALs would go in and get you, or the Marine trap team would go in and get you, or whatever. So that was basically the reason that we were deploying on the carriers. And then that commitment, it went with, the war on terror, it all went away. And it was like, but that was,
and then it changed.
And then on the MARG side of it, the amphibious ready group, with deploying with the ships that take the Marines, we were on there to support the Marine landings and, to go in and do the beach reconnaissance.
Yes.
So, set up the landing places for the Marines to go, and other things. But, then we'd also go off, wherever we were, these were Mediterranean deployments. So we'd get off and go train with the Greeks for a month, get off and, go to Slovenia to go to mountain warfare school, or, so it was a good.
What was your most interesting story before we get into war on terror? But what was a most interesting training story with a particular group, because of your extensive background? What did you find that was interesting in one of these different training experiences?
I think it was 96. So it was at the very end, towards the end of the whole, Bosnia stuff. Bosnia had, kind of calmed down a little bit. It wasn't, so they said, we're going to go to the Slovenian Mountain Warfare School, which is in Bahinska Bela. And, it's like mountain cold weather 101 in the most, even more beautiful than Vermont, if that's possible. I mean, this was in the, Slovenia, in the region that's near the Austrian and Italian borders. And we showed up at the cliff one morning, and I thought it would be like, this is like former Yugoslavia. It would be bullets. It was like a ski lodge we were staying at. It was pristine, but showed up at the foot of a mountain, where we would do the rock climbing, the basic rock climbing. And there's a howitzer there, like a 105 field howitzer, small one, but they're like, today's lesson, we are taking cannon and putting on top of cliff. I was like, all right, but they did it. They taught us how to do it, and
Wow.
They were like, they were in when we would do our long range movements with them, and we climbed Mount Triglav, which is the highest mountain in Slovenia. They were like, we rest at the top. People that, and I used it, get the high ground, keep the high ground. The person that gets highest first wins, because it's hard to fight uphill.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And let me ask you about this, because folks may want to be interested in this, but what is going on in your mind and in your body to push yourself in doing that high altitude work? I mean, do you think it's nature, nurture, a little bit of both? Just, not to be controversial, but I always like to look at, well, what's going on in people when they're doing that, because that's not easy work.
You're part of a team, and you don't want to let the team down.
Okay.
That's it. Be beyond your, the first thing you learn in Boy Scout is be selfless, and we all take that into the military with us. We keep it there. And it's like, I might be in pain, but somebody else is in a lot more pain than I am. Or hopefully they are, or, sort of when I speak about that. But yeah, it's that's what, you got something to do. You have to do it for a certain amount of time, and you can do it. And you can do it because you've done a lot of other, difficult things before.
Then we start moving into the war on terror. And how does that change the whole landscape in regards to the military and your life?
Yeah, well, my experience with the war on terror was basically 2001 to 2006, being active in it, being an actual participant in it, with Afghanistan, Iraq, and then Chad. One of the big differences was that the SEALs finally realized that they needed to deploy the entire team from, 06 down, because, you just couldn't show up with 14 guys and say, hey, use us, because there's a lot of behind the scenes requirements. There's all those talks, there's all those jocks, there's all those liaison positions that need to get filled too. And you can only do that if you deploy everybody. So that was sort of the, before it was like you're just kind of on loan, maybe to the Rangers, maybe to the Marines, something like that. But now we were actually like an organic fighting unit. And we were, my first time in Afghanistan, we were partnered with the Canadians and the Kiwis, the New Zealand guys. And that was, a single unit. And then, so it was more of that. And then, it went from, guys in the SEALs like, well, man, that guy was in Grenada, oh man, that guy was in Desert. We were on ops longer than those whole wars. I'm not speaking ill of them at all.
Yeah, right.
100%, but just the op tempo went through the roof. And it used to be that, I talked about that 12-month, 18-month workup.
Yes.
And then the 6-month deployment. It used to be that the workup was a lot more difficult than the deployment. Now it became the opposite. The deployment was 6 months of, it could be sustained combat or several different, you might go on 100 combat missions in a 6-month deployment. Whereas, before so you came back, you had to decompress, and then you had to prepare for the next deployment, take the next guys over there in another, it actually shortened down to like between 8 and 12 months. So you had to decompress, reset, take care of yourself as best as you could, and, get ready for the next one. So the workups, they were still strenuous. They were still complete. They were still consistent, but it became more, we got to check this block, check this block, check this block, deploy, so.
And so this is very interesting, because around 2009, I found myself, maybe 2013, I found myself one day with guys like Jeff Bull, a Navy SEAL, and Rudy Reyes, Marine recon guy, Nate Smith, another recon guy, and a whole bunch of guys. All of a sudden, we're like in this bar in Chelsea, New York, kind of like the Shishi area. I don't know. People were inviting people to this thing, and I'm like, if there's a fight, I really feel sorry for anyone, But in that whole gathering, Jeff Bull, who was working on a Columbia degree, and I want to get into some of this with you, but he was working on a Columbia degree in some type of analytic I don't know, just like some very complex kind of stuff on his master's at Columbia. And the teams, I think, gave him some time to do it. And then he was in New York at that time, and he was with this Marine. And I was like, well, what are you doing hanging out with this Marine guy? What, I mean, the Marine guy was pretty, I mean, he was like he was a hardcore guy. He was a MARSOC guy. I said, no, we're helping MARSOC to learn, not learn, but kind of like get a certain type of tempo going on, not a tempo, get a certain type of roadmap for deployments. And I think what you just described was probably what Jeff was talking to with this MARSOC guy. So it was really cool just to kind of like get into the worlds of some of
the op tempo became a really big challenge, especially with, you know, a lot of the previous training commitments like SERE, you know, that's a 3-week course. You know, or it can be. These guys don't have 3 weeks to sit and learn, you know, 5 days of material, you know. So, I mean, after I got out and I was working, you know, for a couple of different security and training companies. And, you know, one of the things I did was I developed like a 5-day SERE course. And that was just the purpose of it, was to, these guys, they wouldn't get the actual SERE qual, but they would get the necessary training as long as their commander blessed it, sort of, you know, waved off on it. It would get them in theater. But so there's a lot of that going on, figuring out how, you know, you can get these folks trained up, ready to deploy with all the knowledge that they need in the time that they have.
Right. So one thing about this show, and I've been caught up with this for several decades, is talking about myths in the military and tropes in the military. And one myth that I hear about and I see, ironically enough, it was broken in G.I. Jane when I guess the chief petty officer writes the poem to Demi Moore, you know, gives her like this poem from, I think, Yeats. And you could tell that he was a well-read guy. You know what I mean? Like, not only was he a warrior, but a guy. And that's one of the few images that you get of folks in the special operations community showing kind of this multi-dimensional mind, will, etc. And so I guess it's saying to you, asking you this, with all of those different demands, how do SEALs like Jeff Bull, like yourself and others, still are able to pursue interesting intellectual academic endeavors? What do you do to kind of make that happen for yourself, so that people understand when they say they have the excuse, I don't have the time to do something?
You can read whenever you can.
Okay.
You know, that was the thing. You know, when you're sitting on a boat going somewhere, you read. You know, I got my advanced degree after I got out, but, you know, and I don't know how if guys have time to actually get advanced degrees while they're in. I know that sometimes the Navy or the Army will let guys go for a year or so, but you really don't want to do that, because guys are like, you're going to miss something. You know, we all have Tom's disease, terrified of missing something. You know, you don't want to go away to, like, you know, get some certificate and miss Kosovo, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, and the thing is, the guys that actually make it through special operations, whether it's, well, like in the Army Special Forces, you can't go in until you've been in for a while, for the most. I mean, it goes back and forth. But the guys that, you know, SEALs has a very high attrition rate, like 80%. But, you know, there's 17-year-olds and buds, 18-year-olds, and not 17, but now there's 18-year-olds and buds. You know, and those are the guys that account for this 70% of the 80%. You know, that wash out because they're just too young.
Yeah.
You know, the guys that make it, well, if you look at the age groups, enlisted or officer, you know, 24 years old, 25-year-olds and above, the success rate is probably north of 60%, just because of the emotional maturity. You know, they've either been to college or they've been in the real Navy, and they understand how much that isn't fun. And so they want to do something that's more meaningful. The guys go to the enlisted guys in my, you know, the officers in my buds class, we had a lot of them because I started in May, you know, Naval Academy, Duke, Stanford. Well, the enlisted guys, there was probably, you know, 8 of us. There was Norwich, St. Mike's, Bennington. We had the big Norwich 3, you know, and Middlebury. And then, you know, there was a Notre Dame, Purdue, you know, a couple other, you know, these guys are like, they're smart dudes, you know, educated dudes, whether they've been to college or not. You know, there's some guys who've been around the block for a while.
Right. So, and that doesn't So I want everyone to know who's listening. From the beginning, you're actually screened. You have to have a certain high GT score. So it's not
Right.
that what I'm pointing out is not so much how are people developing themselves from like Neanderthals to intellectuals. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
What I'm saying is, I mean, you've got to go in with something to offer intellectually from the very beginning, and then go through this meat grinder and then make it. And then it was just always interesting. You had said reading was a way to develop yourself because, you know, you graduate from Norwich 1988, and then you're doing the advanced degree. There's a many years of gap for you to do that, and then you're doing it. So did you find the reading and maybe like being aware of the world as something that was very helpful for you when you went on for your master's degree?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, and I did it, you know, I did it at Norwich in
Great.
information
Fantastic.
security.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure. You know, and then there was a lot of reading requirements and writing requirements, you know, in the military as you grow as a leader,
Yep.
obviously. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And I know you're close with your family. And I was just wondering, can you give a couple of words about kind of like family life, the good, the bad, the ugly, just to let people know? Because I think what happens is a lot of people, you know, they'll watch a movie like Lone Survivor, and they'll see, you know, the immediate war experience, but they also miss out on certain things like family on the side and all this. I know the one Korean guy, you may have come across him, or I know you've heard of him, but I guess his last name was C-U-H, I think. But he was really close to his family, and they just really, you know, when he died in I guess the helicopter, when it got shot down for the rescue, and but his family was really tied to him and his whole SEAL life. And I know that there's family tied behind the scenes. It's not just, you know, going into these, you know, super, you know, clandestine type of situations, but there's more to the life than just doing that hard work.
yeah, you know, the family, you know, obviously growing up, mom and dad, you know, were close. I was close to them, you know, and then went into, you know, the Navy. They were supportive, and, you know, I kept in touch throughout. And, you know, when I was married, and, you know, that's when I didn't get divorced until after I got out. But, you know, that was always something that, you know, kept going, to, you know, the commitments of the family,
Mhm.
and, you know, thinking about them. And, you know, it wasn't a distraction, but it definitely helped with the whole decompression process, you know, afterwards and coming home, even if it was a training trip,
Mhm.
you know, seeing the kids, my young daughter, seeing my wife, you know, things like that. It added a bit of, you know, normalcy, you know, to, you know, either a deployment or even a 3-week training trip.
Got it. And yeah. So I'm glad you shared that, because a lot of people think that one has to just be a straight up Iron Man to go through all this, and there's nothing else involved. And
Until you're like, until your young daughters start to adapt your like Navy SEAL language, they start like calling each other shit bags, and, you know, so,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
or your wife says, "Hey, don't talk to me like I'm a bud student," or, you know,
yeah.
you know,
That's a
yeah.
true cultural contribution there,
You know,
no
and
doubt.
here's a quick point about like
Yeah,
something with the family and stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah.
when
Please.
you know, SEALs never dealt with like vehicles until the war on terror. You know, nobody in the SEAL knew how to drive a Humvee. You know, but then we became like mobility experts. So you're going into a target, and you know, do this with security. You know, if it's this protective detail type of thing, or if you're going to do a raid or what have you. You know, you're rolling up on the target. About 30 seconds out, you unbuckle your seatbelt, because you don't want to get in and have to get out and get like tied up in your seatbelt. So I do that to this day. You know, 100 meters from my house, I unbuckle my seatbelt. And then my daughter started doing it. This is when they're young. It's like, what are you doing? They're like, getting out of my seatbelt. I might have to fight, because they would ask me why I would do it. You know, I'm like, might have to fight.
Hilarious. That's funny. And and then when I'm thinking about some of the stuff that you mentioned, as far as the daily life with the SEALs, how did you make up your mind? Because I know people struggle with this. I even, I'm the master retread. I love going to service. I think my next service is to be an Air Force chef,
Yeah,
cook. That's
yeah,
my next,
yeah.
to cover it all. But how did you say to yourself, it's time to hang it up, because you made it at a very high level, and not only that, high level of respect, your environment, all the system. And what made you, and what gave you the insight that just said, hey, I'm gonna take retirement, like
Yeah, well, I think it was not gonna say it was political, but it had to do with like not op tempo, but sort of like manning and structure. I was an E8, which is a senior chief, and I had done usually, you're a chief, you're a platoon chief, then you're a senior chief, you might be another platoon chief, and then you would go on to be a task unit chief. They've changed the lingo, it's like troops and squadrons now, or whatever, and then you'd be an operations chief, team operations chief, and then you'd be command master chief. And so I had been a platoon chief as an E7. I made E8. I was a platoon chief again, which is rare. It wasn't like I did something. I mean, I was grateful for that opportunity to do it again. And then the next time I said, okay, I'm going to be a task unit chief. But there was, somebody senior to me. They got the job. That's fine. But then it had to be, you couldn't go. I would have had to. It was basically going to be another 9 years or another 6 years before I would have been able to be, a command master chief of a command or something. And if that is, if everything worked out perfectly, if I got lucky during another, 3 platoons or 3 deployments. And in the meantime, they were taking all these E8s, and I had done everything. They weren't going to let me. They were like, Hardy, you've had 3 platoon chiefs. Let somebody else have one of those jobs, which is rightful. And so what they were doing is they was taking all of these E8s, there's a lot of them, and they were putting them in talks across the world, and I was like, I had no interest in that, and so that's pretty much. And I had started my last 3 years, my trick to get back into New England was I took an instructor tour at the Navy SERE school up in Rangeley, Maine. So I was up in New England. I started to network with some security companies, some other SEALs that had gotten out and were running security company. I was even doing a little side work for them. So, there was that opportunity, which really, answered. And I had, my daughters were, at this time, like 5 and 3, so I was like, yeah, I'm going to retire. And, I had plans I wanted to go to, if I were to stay in, I would have gone over to like Unit 2 in Germany. If that was, going to be possible, or, it was like my next sort of contingency, but I decided to retire, and I'm glad I did, kind of, I guess, things have worked out well for me. So for the most part,
Yeah.
but, I can, no regrets, but that was the thought process, but it was, one key, opportunity I had. I was back in New England. I love living in New England. I didn't want to go. There's no way I was going back down to Virginia Beach, so that was the factors that led to that decision.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when I finally retired from my hybrid position, because I was loving it, I could mouth off. And as you remember me at Norwich, I had that bad habit. And, I in my hybrid position, I wasn't under UCMJ. So, I was able to work with DOD, in clinical stuff, in combat trauma. And much like you, it was towards the end of my career that, my family started, and with me, it was my family, I actually broke down. So that's a different thing from separation. But the thing about it is that I started to look at it more like, yeah, I'm not really getting stimulus that I was getting before. And that's what I kind of feel that hearing you, that's what kind of like happened.
Yeah.
And so you had to move on.
There was definitely a feeling of like, there's not much else to do here.
Right. So that's why I left combat trauma in the government. And the thing is that I'm fascinated because you're connected to global rescue. Now, I've heard of global rescue, but ironically, with another face, and that's being a hippie monk. A lot of people, don't know this. You knew this, but I spent 10 years also being a monk, and you do a lot of traveling as a monk, and I'd go to Nepal. I do a lot of things, and a lot of times, I'd fake it till I make it, like end up in the Annapurna Trails trying to find a Gurkha temple, outside of my assignment as a monk. But I would do that and run into some Maoist revolutionary. Like, I didn't know what was going on, right? And I'm thinking, if I had an organization or a company, and now that I think of it like Global Rescue, to kind of brief me on some of that stuff beforehand, or like when I was in Bali in Mount Agung and I had an accident and I was rolling down, like, medevac and all that. I didn't know what to do, right? There's no VA there. Like, so I'm trying to figure out all of this stuff. And then when I found out that you're caught up with all of this stuff, whether it's humanitarian type of rescue aid or traveler's aid and all of this, can you say a couple things about that? And can you give maybe some advice for people? Because I think a lot of people think, oh man, there's going to be urgent care clinic, like in the middle of, India, like in Calcutta, or there's going to be this, or there's going to be that. And so can you share a little bit about that and what?
Yeah, sure. So Global Rescue, I ended up joining Global Rescue. I knew about it in when I was still in the military, like 2008, 2009. And I actually first talked to them in 2011 while I was going to Yemen for an oil company, but I didn't join them until 2018. Scott Hume is the VP of operations, another Norwich guy, one of my classmates. And so I joined. It's a travel risk crisis management company. And we do for travelers around the world, consumer members, adventure travelers, corporations, all sorts of, we do, medical, security, and intelligence advisory service. Like, hey, don't go to that side of Mount Everest because it's China. That's kind of basic, you know what I mean?
But a lot of people aren't aware.
I just had a call last week with a woman who's climbing, what is it, G2, not K2, but G2, Garbush 2 or whatever in Pakistan. And she was concerned about being a woman in Pakistan, those kind of things. So we get on, we do this pre-travel advisory, we do medical advisory. They also support them when they travel. Anything from, we have somebody, that's sick in Paris, France right now. So we're telling them, where they can get to, what pharmacy to go to, what clinic to go to, that sort of thing. If there's no clinic, if we had another person that's coming down off of Mount Kilimanjaro, where we're organizing that evacuation. And then there's the security evacuations. Last week, there's a lot of protests going down in Ecuador right now over inflation and fuel prices, and all the farmers are, they can't afford to plant crops. They can't afford to cultivate their crops because they just don't, so they're setting up these roadblocks. So there were some travelers that were blocked. They couldn't get to the airport. Airport was open, commercial traffic was open, but if you can't get to the airport, that doesn't matter. So we were arranging ways for them to get to the airport, via helicopter. So that's, in a nutshell what we do. And it's great. And we do deploy, like I've deployed to, as a security liaison for a corporation that was going to Beirut for about a month. Mm-hmm. So, but we don't, those folks in Ecuador, I'm not sending anybody to Ecuador. We have partners in the region in South America. We have a very good, security company in Colombia that has capability in Ecuador. I call them, I've met them with them, we've vetted them, we've talked, they're friends of mine, so they actually conduct a mission, and we run our operations center. We coordinate, collaborate, and they do the same thing for medical. We have doctors on staff. So if you're, hiking in Bali and you got some weird rash, you call up Global Rescue and say, hey, I got this rash. They take a picture of it and you can tell you what the rash is, where you can get things,
So people can, because I know a lot of veterans and civilians, especially folks, viewers who are civilians, a lot of them either are tied to humanitarian projects overseas, or they'll do adventure stuff. I'm into adventure motorcycle riding. And so I have a friend that goes all throughout Mexico. So I'm going to give him
who do you travel with when you do that?
I do it alone, brother. I do it alone.
Well, then you got to we got to talk. You need global risk. But a lot of the, if you were to go with MotoQuest, they're one of our partners.
Okay.
They do a lot of these tours. While you were with MotoQuest would say, hey, we're not taking you on this trip unless you have global rescue. Because if you need an air ambulance out of northern Alaska on your motorcycle, it's gonna be very, very expensive. And so we're not an insurance company, but it is an insurance model. We would pay that helicopter directly. You wouldn't see a bill. We're an insurance company. You may see a bill, you may have to pay it and then do a claim. So we would pay that directly as long as, MotoQuest would call us. Hey, Mike fell off his motorcycle. He needs to go to the hospital. It's like, okay, where is he? Okay, we're going to have to get a helicopter to him. So we call the nearest helicopter asset that we have. But if you're going by yourself, you need to know about it too. And then it's a very important point you had about, many veterans are involved in these overseas efforts, humanitarian efforts, contracting somewhere. The question they need to ask is just that: I get sick. How am I getting home? If we need to evacuate, what's the plan for that? Who's bringing us out?
And to also set up something like global rescue will also set up if people need, let's say I'm doing, maybe, I don't know if I'll do it on this bike, but I may get a smaller bike to do it, but like Copper Canyon, where the cartels are, in Mexico. So if I'm going down there in Copper Canyon, something goes down. The thing about it is, if I need insurance for, I don't know, to be flown out or some type of insurance, would global rescue also give me or other people suggestions as far as what type of insurance I can buy for traveling?
Right. So we're a membership service company. We're going to get you out. If you're going to Copper Canyon and we look and we see it's a really dangerous place, we're going to say, don't go to Copper Canyon. And that's what it's called, because there's an existing security situation there. And, we're not if you want to go to Libya. No, I had a journalist that was going to Libya, and then he was going to do a follow-on trip to DRC. And I said, look, Global Rescue can provide medical services in Libya, but we can't do security because it's too volatile right now. There's still ongoing conflict. He's like, Roger that. Ended up getting arrested. We were able to communicate with him and communicate with his organization and the governments involved, because he was with 3 other people, all of them were from different countries. So that would be the situation, but you have to be a member before. But like insurance, so Global Rescue will get you home. It's like AAA but it's for you. They'll get your car out of the woods into the shop, but they won't pay the shop bill, and they won't pay to repair your car or to repair. You don't pay the medical bills, but we'll get you the information you need before you go. We'll keep you informed on the way, and we'll get you home if we have to. If you get injured, and then we can recommend different insurance products.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
To protect your trip.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. That's what I think of the big mistake. A lot of humanitarian travelers and journalists, and I have a lot of journalist friends who are viewers and also on my Facebook, so they'll probably watch this show. I think this is going to be important for many of them, because I just think they think, okay, something goes down, the American embassy is going to bail you out. Whereas I figured that out when I was in India. And
your emergency is not the embassy's emergency. I mean, they do good work for travelers over there, but you lose your passport on a Friday, you're not talking to anybody until Monday.
Right.
You get arrested, you're in jail for a while until somebody from the embassy comes.
Right.
Or you get sick, and the embassy has to know that you're, so you need to enroll. Anytime you go overseas, you need to enroll in their STEP program, so you get all the advanced you need more than one source. So you get your Global Rescue information. You go on a 7-day trip, you buy a 7-day membership, Global Rescue, for like $200 or whatever it is. And then you also, you look at your intel from the U.S. Embassy, from enrolling in their program, and you're going to Bulgaria. So you get all the information about Bulgaria.
And you're more informed, and you put it all together. And then, and it's also like getting a professional consult. Like if I'm going to work on a certain trauma project with a certain type of brain injury community, I'm not a specialist in brain injury. So I'm going to try to contact a therapist who has that. So I'm willing to have a consult with them, so that when I go to the site, I can be better prepared for that. So in many ways, is that a good comparison?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I really appreciate this insight, because I know of a lot of, travelers, and also I'll pass on global rescue also to the religious communities, because, there's been monks, Franciscans who were killed in Peru,
Yeah, no, we
during-
have several, faith-based organizations that we support. Some of them are New York based.
Okay,
In fact, we have a big
Okay.
health company down in that's one of our, enterprise clients, but do a lot of
fantastic.
work.
I'll definitely let them know about
Yeah.
all that, and I'll also include that information down in the links of this vid.
It'd be globalrescue.com. Not
Global
putting
Rescue.
a commercial there or anything, but yeah.
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 No.
Yeah.
I want to do it because I don't want, well, myself, but I don't want people I care about. I hear all kinds of stuff. Like I'm going. I don't know. I heard, what was the last crazy thing that I heard? Someone, they were going to go, and I was just like, dude, you gotta maybe rethink it. But they were saying that they were going to a certain area of Colombia, and I was like, dude, just because the news is saying the revolution's over doesn't necessarily mean that you can't just disappear,
Right. No,
and
exactly.
especially in that area.
Yeah.
And so,
Right. 100%. And the thing about it is that if you get injured or you get, something, and you call Global Rescue and you're not a member, we're still going to help. It's just going to be very, very expensive. It's going to be like 20,000 instead of your $200 membership. And that's the same for any of these organizations. There's a lot of competitors out there, people that are doing these kinds of adventure travel or going to these any country really. You need to really have, especially now, you really need to get a travel protection program.
you
Whether
do.
it's Global Rescue or whoever.
You do, because I spent 40 days in Hawaii over the winter, and I was doing some of my crazy adventure stuff with a rent-a-car, which was, I didn't get the protection. So just to make your point clear, I put it on Amex. Luckily, it was only the hatch on a Explorer, Nissan Explorer.
Yeah.
But it overcharged me like $2,000. If I signed the protection, I wouldn't have to deal with Amex. All the paperwork that I have to deal with Amex,
exactly. Right?
It's just a pain in the ass. So I ended up just paying $2,000 out of pocket, and I figured next time I'm going to do a protection plan, because it could have been $30,000.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Do that with the rental cars. That I just wrote an article about that, because the most dangerous thing you're going to do anywhere, most dangerous thing you're going to do in Libya, get in a car. The most dangerous thing you're going to do in Nepal, get in a car. Most dangerous thing you do in America, get in a car. So there's a lot of, auto safety things that, especially when you're traveling. And one of those things is getting the daily damage waiver with $25, and you drop the keys and go.
Okay. And then this issue of these plans and everything, that's great. How would you say is one, when they're stuck, if they're stuck and they didn't sign up for anything, it will cost more money, but it's still better than nothing. They can contact Global Rescue for consultation?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. And so, just to give an example, one of the folks that we helped in Ecuador, they weren't a member, and we looked into, they didn't end up going with the asset that we had found. They already had one from another, they just basically called a charter aviation company. They got lucky, because they're used to being in that world, I guess. But, usually it's, there's going to be the consulting fees, and there's going to be, we have to go, charter an aircraft, and that charter aircraft isn't going to fly without getting paid, so
Wow.
it becomes, and we don't know if they're not our member, if they're our member, we pay for it. But they would have to pay us, and then we pay them. So, that also affects a lot of the timing of getting folks, because nothing, you can look at our website or any of the websites, and it's like, oh, wow, all these Navy SEALs are going to come over the horizon in 20 minutes.
Right.
Not when you're like, deep on the Chari River in Chad. That's not happening. It's going to take however long it took you to get in is probably the soonest somebody is going to be able to get there. You have local assets all over the world, but still.
No, I mean, it's what can be done and what can't be done. And that I think, we were talking about Julius Caesar. My thing is Aristotle and how he influenced Alexander the Great. And what you just said kind of mirrors that. And it was like Aristotle taught Alexander the Great to basically, sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes courage isn't going in to Chad under those conditions to do that type of a rescue like that. That's not courage, because it's not reasonable. I can
wrap that thought up in about one sentence. Sometimes it takes more of a hero to say, no, we need to go to extraction, we've been compromised, than to say, oh, we can continue on. Because he's going to say, no, we've been compromised, we don't have commo, we got to get out, we go to extract. Nothing's heard. You go to extract, everybody gets on the bird, and you leave. That's a hero.
Yeah.
That takes some courage to do that, because you know what's going to happen when you get back. You're going to get hackled. You're going to be like, why did you fail? Why did you fail? But that's okay. Everybody's alive. Something went wrong, and you did what you stuck to the plan, and that takes courage.
And that's, and Alexander, it wasn't the Battle of Gaugamela, but it was the battle with the elephants, because he stretches himself out to India, and then people are saying, so he had that bad experience. So he pulls back and then gets his mind going, thinking about, how to beat, these folks with the elephants. And then he re-engages. But I think people from the back there, from the rear, they were just kind of concerned, but it's just like what you're talking about. And I think he took that from Aristotle, and then he was able to kind of like from that situation, the next following engagement. Yeah. So I want, because I could talk to you forever. So we'll need a part 2, but I want to ask you 2 important things. One, the influence of art on your father, because he's an artist, and there's a piece that I still have not purchased for my son, because he has not shown me the maturity that he can handle it. He's only 11. I think in a couple of years, he'll truly appreciate it. But can you say a few things about the influence of art on your father, some of the military things in those art pieces, because I was definitely moved by his art. And then the other thing is some words regarding readjustment that other veterans may be experiencing, maybe the short game and the long game, vets that may have just gotten released from their contracts, or veterans already kind of like going through readjustment for a while, and just, some messages on that. But going back to your father, can you say some things?
Yeah, my dad was a professional artist. He did watercolors, Winslow Homer type of stuff, seascapes, cityscapes, the farms, stuff like that. And, he was also a veteran, very proud of that. And, some of his pieces had military themes, especially around Veterans Day, Memorial Day. He did those paintings like later in life too. And, it was always important to me. I've dabbled in, watercolors a little bit, but, the thing about it,
I'm going to cut you in. I'm going to cut in on this. So when I was a monk, it's like, Harding's a SEAL, and I'm like, I was a monk. So, I'm the master thumb wrestler in prayer. He's a master in shooting and going to the thing about it is that your issue with watercolor and your father's issue with watercolor, I just want to give incredible credit, because when I was a monk, like, I went through my pre thing, and I passed that. It took me a while. I fell in love, I had to start all over again. But anyway, I end up like in the show, going in my novitiate. And so I'm doing that. And they're like, oh, well, you have to cultivate yourself in some way. I said, oh, I'll do watercolor. So they spent like, I don't know, $2,000 with some private instructor. And I thought I was going to ace it, and tried it. I tell you, I quit after the 4th class because of so much frustration to control the control that's needed to master the water as well as the paint. And it was so challenging. And so I just thought I'd add that. And I'd like to hear again more stuff about the watercolor, and then your dad and your experiences with painting.
Well, my dad doing it for 60 years, more than that, 70 years. He had all the tricks. to control that water. One of the things was you had to get really good paint. You had to get the Winsor Newton Professional, and then you had to get really good 300-pound weight watercolor paper. That helps with the control, and then wet it and shrink the paint. So there's all of these things. Use masking. All kinds of different brushes for different techniques, and sponge. Where times you're painting with a knife or a sponge than you are anything else. And one of the other things he said about it, the most difficult part is painting is knowing when to walk away when it's done. When is it? You got to know how to when it's done. That type of stuff. And and I haven't done it as much as I'd like to, but
it's something.
One of the things I like about all my dads, my dad passed away in 2018, but every time in my house I go like that, I look at a painting and the guy's talking to me, or I hear his words, or his thoughts when he painted that, what he was thinking, was going through his head. It's there.
Tell me that piece that spoke to me immediately on. It was a British Veterans Day, I think.
Remembrance
that I
Day.
want for my son.
Yeah.
So that could be found through Harding Bush art.
I think if you go to Fine Art America, it's there.
Yeah.
A lot of his stuff is there. I still have to figure out, people are saying, look what I got at your dad's. I'm like, oh, really? I didn't say, I got to get with them and figure out how I can get,
right.
See how that's still happening and stuff. But they are available there. I probably have 200 or 300 paintings that I got to get framed up. Wow. And maybe thinking about hitting the art fair circuit or whatever, but
fantastic work. I was really, like I said, I want my son to have this in the future so that he recognizes the importance of service. And then this question, the climax I want to end with, because you're a man that has gone through, a career and in this kind of like highly prestigious. I don't think a lot of people get to understand, different perspectives from readjustment. People knew from Audie Murphy that he had challenges, but he also had glories, after his readjustment. Jimmy Stewart as well. These vets, they provided some things, but at the same time, I also feel as though folks coming from that kind of level, either elite forces or notoriety, they're not seen as kind of like persons. And I was just wondering if you can give some words regarding readjustment towards people. I know there was one point that you shared with me once, but I want you to kind of share it with folks. But what do you think can be valuable for readjustment if there's someone listening here?
Yeah, I think the first thing you guys have to understand, I think I've been very lucky, and I've done exactly what I planned to do when I got out, for the most part, as far as you're getting out and going into the security world, staying in that sort of, back then it was kind of like a spec ops for life type of thing. So I worked for, a friend of mine that had a security company, and they had a contract over in Yemen. I worked in the oil fields over there as a security guy, did a whole bunch of training with the State Department and Defense Department for folks training overseas. A lot of executive protection, and so that's what I wanted to do, and that really helped me adjust because I was confident in doing what I knew I did well. And
your meeting making process was still active,
right? And then there was, the thing was, I didn't have nearly any of the resources that I had before when I was in the military for it, so there was things like that. But I think the thing, as you plan to get out, you have to understand that you're never going to have as cool of a job that you have in the military. You're never going to have the level of responsibility that you have even if you're a 26-year-old squad leader and I'm not saying anything bad about, conventional military whatsoever. You're a 26-year-old squad leader or team leader in the 10th Mountain Division. You got a lot of responsibility. You're never going to have that much more responsibility in your life ever. Mm-hmm. So you have to, as your decision-making process, am I ready for that? Am I ready to fill my life with, find other things to fill what those challenges did? And you're going to get out, you go for a job, they're going to ask you if you handle stress. Come on. You know what I mean? It's like a punch in the face. You think like working at Target is stressful, or, working for this warehouse or working, whatever, sales position is going to be. No, it's nothing, but you have to understand that, you don't want to like isolate yourself as a veteran. You do have to assimilate, because these people don't know. I've seen it. Somebody asked me the other day, say, so after you're sergeant major, what do you become, a second lieutenant? Like, no, sergeant major punches second lieutenant in the face. No, come on.
They teach you.
Yeah, exactly.
The Chiefs,
So
that's what the Chiefs did with me, that
right.
saved my career, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
If it wasn't for the Chiefs,
Right.
I would have been in the brig,
Yeah.
I mean, really, the Chiefs,
Yeah.
I'm always asking, people were saying, well, when you talk to people and you ask about people from units, I was asking about Chief Leeson, Chief Ansell, because those are the guys that kind of had the old man kind of,
Right.
calm down,
Yeah,
give them some time.
So people don't understand that, they really don't. And, and I'm seeing, one thing I'm seeing though now that I really like is, because I'm seeing, people, other veterans, we had a job opening and I'm interviewing and talking to all these, the veterans and stuff. And I wasn't seeing as many because these guys are really making those decisions to go in they're going out, they're going to business school, sometimes before they get out of school, before they get out of the military. So they're going into more conventional areas of business and commerce than the military, and that's going to fill up, those. But you're always going to, you're never going to feel more. You're going to feel alone. You're not going to know what's going on first, but you don't realize it. You don't have that team and that tribe with you any longer. So you do have to, fill that somehow. And and I think, one of the things I just was feeling that I noticed there was some, I had a great job. I just moved to New Hampshire at a nice house, everything, good relationship at the time. And I got a call from the VA and they're like, this veteran support guy, and he's like, hey, how come you're only 10% service connected and you're Navy SEAL? I said, no, I'm 70%, and he's like, oh, well, we got to switch that. And then we started talking about some PTSD issues. And if I would like to talk to somebody, I said, yeah, why not? Why not? It can never, and I've been doing it for 2 years now. And it's been, and I think it's increased my awareness of what, because I was always like, veteran is what I did, not what I am.
Yes.
But, and like Navy SEALs, what I did, it's not what I am. And I learned that that's not the case. It is kind of what I am, and became more aware. And it's just, it's helped. And,
And
then with and I think part of the problem is we're so taught to be selfless, and when you're out and you're alone, there's nobody but you, and your family. So you have to, because as you're being selfless guess who else is being selfless? Your family's being selfless. But, you gotta like hook yourself up.
Yeah.
You gotta, negotiate for yourself, project your objectives, things you want to do. It's not about the team anymore. You might get in some, like where I am, I'm kind of in a team, but not really. Never like it's going to be before. You're never going to go through the same experiences that you did with folks in the military ever. And for those like companies that try and bring in ex-SEALs and ex-Green Berets to have these like power talks, doesn't work. You can't replicate that in an hour,
Right. I think you're hitting on something that this real young recon guy, I interviewed him, Stuart Doyle. He wrote an article. He's a, I feel like punching him in the face because he's like 28 years old, and he wrote like this great article on an academic article on, I'll send it to you, on how everything that you just said, that there's something about who you are in the job that you did in the military, because it's so up close and personal, especially your type of warfare, not trying to elevate one for another, but it's the reality. And when you're in such an intimate reality and you're back in civilian world, it's not, for example, a desire for mindless violence or anything like that. It's more an issue of, that's how you are wired. That's how you've actualized that wiring in a very honorable, civilized way through the military and everything. And then when you're out, as Stuart was saying, that you don't have that. And what he did, you went into security, he did that as well, and then started being an MMA fighter at like 32. And so he has no excuses about that, because he's saying kind of like what you just said, I am this. I'm going to own this. I was a recon Marine, like what you're saying. You're a Navy SEAL, even though you're civilian now, you still have those things within you. And I feel that way in combat trauma, even though I retired, I really miss doing that work. And I had to find research like you, find something else that's tied to what I'm doing, but not in the same way. So I really appreciate the example you give, because it helped me kind of like tap into myself. Cool. Awesome. And part 2's coming up. And I really appreciate you being on here. And I also appreciate your candor. And let's have you back again.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Bush, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. So have a
I
great.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. And coming from you, it means something, because folks, you got to understand, I met Harding when I was a snot-nosed 18-year-old, and I was really lost, and I really wanted some direction. And the beautiful thing about my experience at Norwich, I don't know if it's changed, but I did feel that there were people I could look up to and say, hey, I want to be like that. I want to have these type of traits, because that can help me in the future. And again, having these folks from Norwich like yourself, and then having them in the military, I have become a better father, a better person. Yeah, it's just helped me. So thanks again for, being an influence to me and others.
You're welcome.
All right. Take care.
Yep, you too.
All right.
Veteran Etc. invites you to join us again with your host, Mike Kim, every Sunday. If the content from this podcast is informative to you, please share the podcast with others. Give a like and/or post something you learned from the episode on social media. If interested in other truly informative podcasts like Veteran Etc., check out cominghomewell.com for a listing of other veteran-based podcasts. Thank you for tuning in.